I guess in an ideal world, I'd love to see email still exist, obviously, more so as a branding channel than ever. But SMS is probably going to be the end all be all, at least for that time period, next couple of years. I really think that. By all means, you can get as fancy with the design as you want. I know everyone wants to look super good, and the consumer ultimately doesn't really care. And sometimes if you get too fancy with it, it can hurt your end result, which is engagement or revenue. People won't open it. People won't click on it.
Email and SMS marketing automation. Now, is it the sexiest topic? We think so, but everyone might not agree. But if done right, is it one of the best ways to make more money for your store? 100% yes. It's one of the most effective ways to become more profitable on a daily basis. And that's why Ecom Growers is offering to build out your backend email and SMS automations for free until you start making more money from them. Trusted by over 100 7- and 8-figure brands, Ecom Growers has developed a simple yet effective system to turn more of your traffic into buying customers. And they're willing to build it out at no cost until they start producing more revenue for you. It's literally a risk-free investment. So head over to ecomgrowers.com, link in the description below, and schedule a call to reserve your spot before they fill up. Welcome to another episode of the Messenger Mastermind podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jeremy Horowitz, and we are rejoined. So good the first time we had to have him back on to break down email and SMS. So without further ado, let me introduce Chris Pettit-Maroney from Ecom Growers. Chris, how's it going?
It's going well. Can't complain.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're just catching up right before this, and we spend so much time working together, but we actually haven't really talked in 2 years. So it's crazy. I'm sure we have a lot to catch up on. But before we dive in, can you just give the quick overview, very abridged version? If anybody wants to go back and get the full story, they can go back to our original episode. How you got into this crazy game of e-com and what you're working on now?
Yeah, sure. So graduated from college, engineering degree, hated it, got a job at an e-commerce company, doing a little bit of everything. Ended up partnering with my boss to form this agency after I got decently good at email marketing. And that was a couple of years ago. So here we are today serving clients and their needs to take over the email and SMS channel for them and drive results.
Awesome. Very cool. So let's dive right in. I think last time we talked pre-iOS 15, SMS was still a new kind of sexy channel, but nobody had really figured it out yet. I guess we had, but nobody really, the greater market hadn't figured it out yet. What are you seeing right now from just a general trend perspective that you're really excited about? What are you in email or SMS? What's something really cool that's going on?
Yeah, I think the kind of broader trend that I'm excited about is the coming together of email and SMS, because it was so new the last time we talked, and kind of people were exploring the channel, how to use XYZ. With the iOS updates, email becoming a little less friendly to track results. And I'm sure at some point that'll come to SMS as well. But really looking at email and SMS as one core channel together versus two separate beings. I'm excited about that trend because they do act hand in hand, and it's great for me to not have to necessarily drive that conversation. Businesses are kind of fully aware of that at this point.
Very cool. Okay. And I feel like this was the great debate for the past 4 years of what is email? What is MS? How do they play together? So for anybody who still doesn't believe, can you just break down how you see those two channels tactically working, or maybe strategically? It probably makes more sense. How strategically do you use one channel versus the other for the few holdouts out there who still haven't adopted SMS yet?
Yeah. So that's evolved a little bit since the last time we talked, and really saw the effects this past Q4. I'm sure you're fully aware. I definitely think SMS is going to overtake email for almost every brand as the pure revenue driver. Direct response, click, call to action, get to the website, buy now. That's just a better channel for it. And I think email is going to be more of a branding, goodwill, content to support the direct response on the SMS side of things. That's kind of how I'm starting to look at it, and how I think brands should strategically look at it.
Wow, hot take. Email is going to become a brand channel. Also, I just love that you have made your mark in email, and I love the huge evolution. So walk me through that a little bit more. I know we're going completely off a tangent here, but what do you see the future of email looking like?
Yeah, so holistically, even before SMS came out, it was a revenue driver. This is the way to reach your audience and get them to take the action without having to throw money at Facebook. And it still is that. But as time goes on, especially with the lack of transparency and open rates, it's tough to really nail that down. And I see a slow but steady decline in people clicking through, buying, etc. So long term, if you have a blog, if you have content, if you're producing videos, if I would like to start looking at email as not a direct response like put in X, get out Y, but instead drive brand awareness and engagement and really an audience that when you do have a sale or you do have a product launch, you can still send that email to get the sale, right? But just know if you're building SMS, that's where the real action is probably going to be. And by leveraging email to send out, 2, 3, 4 brand heavy content pieces of styled campaigns weekly, if you will, which you can't really do on SMS. You'll drive people insane, at least not yet. When you do send that SMS, it's just they're ready to go. Email's primed them. They're ready to buy.
Okay, so this is fascinating. So I think this is a pretty fundamental restructuring of how most people today probably run their, whatever you want to call it, retention stack, CRM stack.
Yep.
So walk me through how that your new philosophy changes the fundamental funnel. I feel like if you're talking about email as a branded channel, are you still doing email capture pop-ups on the site, or is that now SMS? What does that look like as you just cascade down to abandoned carts and post-purchase and all those the tried and true money makers of email?
Yeah. So still doing all that, still get the email, still build in the abandoned cart and post-purchase flows, what have you, with some desire to drive revenue. But I know with the conversation I've had with a lot of clients and even prospects and future businesses that we're going to work with, don't expect or don't try to extract as much as you can out of email, because I think it's like a losing battle long term. Flip it, look at it as a way to build that goodwill. Get someone's email at the pop-up, try to convert them just like you would normally with a welcome, lead nurture, however you want to phrase it, but really look at SMS to drive that conversion. Optimize SMS to drive that conversion and have email support it. So before, I would say email was the number one spot and SMS was kind of number two people were building. I think it's starting to and definitely is going to flip in the future, where SMS should probably be the main focus and email will support that.
Very cool. Yeah. I know a couple of brands who have swapped their 2-for-1 pop-up that now it's SMS first, then email, instead of the traditional more email than SMS. So I know multi-step pop-ups have come in vogue, come out of vogue, are back in vogue. For anyone who isn't familiar, what are multi-step pop-ups and why are you so bullish on it?
Yeah. So multi-step pop-ups is just as straight as it can be, multiple steps a consumer will go through to exit the pop-up, which at base level, there's pushback, right? Brands are like, that's a friction point. That's something you don't want to do. And ideally, you want people to convert and buy when you send them to the website. But you do want to build these back-end channels, email and SMS. So multi-step pop-up would be, our go-to now is a five-step pop-up.
Wow.
Yeah. We've tested it. Klaviyo has improved their form feature dramatically, so it's so easy to run these tests and see the data. But if you're not going to run a Wheelio or spin to win type pop-up, which still is okay, still works, I have no critique against that. But step one would be a yes or no question, something super basic, like a consumer sees it on the website. They don't even have to think about it. They just say yes or no. It's engaging, it's relevant to the brand. It gets them in the quote unquote pop-up funnel. From there, give them a reason to give you their email or SMS, phone number. You can do it either order. I still see the email first, SMS second is working better for the clients we've tested it on. We get more net new subscribers that way, but get those two opt-ins. And then secondary to all of that, some zero-party data. I know that's a hot topic right now with iOS updates. So whether it's birthdays, shopping preferences, what type of style they're looking at for an apparel brand, if you will. There's a bunch of questions that could be relevant to the client you're working with or the brand you're working with. And then leveraging that on the back end to segment your list or put them down different funnels or dynamically show different content in those emails based on that zero-party data collection. Yeah.
Cool. And so we got the yes, no, 1, 2, are the second two steps just all zero, progressions of zero-party data?
Yes. Yep. And at that point, maybe you could throw the promo code in the pop-up. You could throw it in the message. Maybe it's just a giveaway entry, whatever the offer is, that'll dictate it a little bit. But yeah, those last couple steps would be more information that would help you better serve the consumer.
Yeah. So walk me through the next step. So we just first, I gotta ask, How do you convince people to do a 5-step pop-up? I feel like when I used to do this in the past, having a 3-step pop-up was like a huge debate that like needed to be had. So how do you convince brands, or like what have you seen that's really given you so much confidence that this, like, I guess my second part of the question is, how long is the efficacy of these pop-ups?
Yeah. So I'm sure there'll be some cycle, right? Like for the while, the spin to win Wheelio stuff that came in hot a couple of years ago, and like every website had it, and it I don't want to say it loses its effect, but like anything in marketing, you do it too much, you gotta improve it. But that conversation really just comes down to the fact, like, hey, test it for a week. Let's see if our net opt-ins increase, and even if they stay the same, but you're getting that additional data, it's a win-win. So that's usually how I phrase it. I think as things have evolved in e-commerce, there's not so much pushback anyways now, but that's typically to like just let the data dictate it, and let's test it out.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So we've captured all that information. Are you just routing the form data into like Klaviyo profiles and then just creating, like, how much is being triggered, or what is, I guess my real question is, what is being triggered based on routing all that data into Klaviyo?
Yeah. So right off the bat, the simplest thing you could do, depending on the data you're collecting, is just have different paths down a welcome series flow if you wanted to get fancy with it based on the information they give you. So if they identify their shopping, I'm just going to use apparel for the sake of argument here, shopping for, women's leggings, send them down a women's leggings welcome series, try to convert them on email, but then in SMS, give them an offer and let the email content support that. Because you're also limited on the SMS channel for, 160 characters, maybe throw in a graphic, but that's going to dramatically increase the cost. I know one of this, and most people know this at this time, but that would be the first thing. And then ongoing, long term, if you've got those preferences for your campaigns, you can dynamically show certain content in those emails based on that. At a very basic level, maybe in the footer, a feature for the women's leggings sale you're trying to push, or if they identify they're shopping for men, men's accessories. And again, that's like incremental improvements. You might see click improvements there to drive more revenue, but at the very least, it's making the messaging more relevant for people getting that content.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those, like, I'll never forget when I signed up for Forever 21, selected male, and then only got rompers and bralettes from them for like 3 months. And I was just like, based on my on-site viewing behavior and what I abandoned in my cart, how in the world did I get this? But sorry, little side tangent. But I do think it really speaks to the value of that, like, it's not personalization, but that mass segmentation that you can get smarter with. So how are you thinking about rolling that out? Like, does that travel all the way through the funnel with a client, or are you really focusing that on more of that, like, first sale, get them through the funnel, and then pick up more of purchase data or something? Or is it layering on? Like, how do you think about that data stack when you're going not only through that first purchase, but through the full funnel?
Yeah. So definitely first purchase, first when they come on the list, first opt-in, that would be the main focus. And then long term, once you have a little bit more purchase history data, again, I'm leveraging Klaviyo here because it is just the platform we use. It's very easy to see what collections they buy, what they're interested in, what designs have you. And you can niche it down and get super targeted with that. Honestly, when we've done that, I haven't seen any lift. It just ends up making it a little bit more complicated. So I would just rely on the dynamic blocks within Klaviyo. We've honestly just been doing that more and more, sending broader sends, if you will, to the engaged list, and leveraging the dynamic content to make it more personal, just on an ongoing basis. And a very simple way to do that would even be like data feeds with specific collections that you're showing on the website, and leveraging that even to personalize the content versus getting like super fancy with, which you can do. I'm not against it, but it muddies the water a little bit with like 10 different sends a day to different groups, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I feel like your list has to be so big before that incremental return is really there. So, like, out of a standard email, just really high level, how many of those are dynamic blocks now versus how many of those are those like traditional, we plugged in content?
Yeah. So if you had a standard email, 3 blocks, header image, copy block, and then 1 dynamic block in the footer, and that would be it. Okay,
cool. Actually, that's a good segue to what I wanted to talk about next, because I feel like one of the earliest agencies, especially, and one of a lot of your early clients that you worked with were I really think like the leaders in the like not overly designed emails, and not like really like going for the insane aesthetic and all these images, and like keeping things simple. And so now that I'm sure you have way more data on it, and now it's like people are more open to testing it, can you just walk us through the philosophy of like why less is more in email design?
Yeah, yeah. After going super complicated with the data collection, whatnot, yes. So, ultimately, yeah, less is more. And by all means, you can get as fancy with the design as you want. I know everyone wants to look super good and on brand and like, wow, every email I send is like an amazing work of art. And that's fine to have that mindset and do that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the consumer ultimately doesn't really care. And sometimes if you get too fancy with it, it can hurt your end result, which is engagement or revenue. People won't open it, people won't click on it, and you may just end up going backwards in terms of the goals you have by getting too fancy with the design. So if I were to like make my recommendation, it'd be less is more. You could keep it as basic as an image, a copy block, and if you want to throw the dynamic blocks in there, if you're getting that level of fancy with it, do it. But we just brought on a client who was doing about $35 million annually, and they're like a high-end fashion brand. Mm-hmm. They weren't doing SMS, so we're setting that up for them. They were doing emails, sending 3 emails a week, and those emails are just as what I told you already. Like I didn't even have to pitch it to them. But less is more. It's like 3 blocks. It's an image. You're not even editing the image. It's just the photography, and they're driving like 40% of revenue from Klaviyo on a one-day attribution window. It's amazing, and that's really all you need. I would leverage it more that way versus trying to get super fancy where you can hire 5 graphic designers and get look to Apple or Nike for your design inspiration. But then at the same time, if you look at those emails, they're pretty minimal and basic too. So that's how I think about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if we're not relying on the design for the email, what are we relying on?
Strategy and simplistic calls to action. And that call to action doesn't necessarily always have to be revenue. Again, like I would look more to SMS for that now, but don't overcomplicate it. If you're launching a product, you can build a very simple, like 3-4 launch sequence and maximize it that way and spend your time on thinking through what's going to excite people, what's going to make them want to buy, what's going to be simple for them to look at the email and know instantly like the action they need to take versus reading like a long newsletter where, they're not really sure where to click, so to say. So if I had to break it down that way, spend, 80% of your time on the strategy, 10% of the time on 15% of the time on the copy, and 5% of the time on the design. Like that's how I would recommend doing it, because that's really where you'll get the best outcome for what you're looking for.
Awesome. Yeah. And that seems like a very simple pyramid of like where you should prioritize. So, I mean, you mentioned SMS a lot, and big SMS nerd here. Where have you seen like the greatest growth of SMS so that now it really seems like you're weaving it into a lot of different parts of this component. So are we talking about like segmentation and campaigns, flows, all of it, something that maybe I haven't brought up before? Like where are you like seeing so much traction in SMS that's making you so bullish on it?
Yeah. So at its core, it's just the fact that, if we have 100,000 person email list and 100,000 person SMS list, I know that's relatively large, but just to use that as numbers, if we send a campaign out, you might get 10,000 clicks from email in a really good case. I'd say base, you're going to get like 40, 50,000 clicks from SMS. So it's just the traffic figures, the pure traffic figures. That's what excites me the most. And the fact that you can parallel it just the same as you would with email, with campaigns, automations, except by design, SMS is more of a 2-directional communication channel. And the software platforms are getting a little bit more robust now, where you can leverage that in an automated way to have that authentic back and forth communication. That's pretty exciting. So to the consumer, they're using SMS the way it was actually intended, not just like getting random messages from a brand to click a link, which is fine, but you can also take it up a level.
Yeah, well, I feel like the broadcasting is like V1, and then once the customer is in that user experience, then you can do the cool things. So are there any specific use cases that you all have either already deployed or you're like really excited to be able to deploy in SMS on that, like more of conversational side of the channel?
Yep. So kind of to go with the zero-party data collection after, through the opt-in pop-up, whatnot, putting them through an SMS flow where you ask a series of questions to learn more about them. And they're presented with 2 options. Again, yes or no, just like the first step of the pop-up I talked about, where they don't really have to think about it. They just reply back with A or reply back with B, what have you. And then just tagging them with that information. So again, when you send those campaigns, even through email, because it's very simple to do cross-platform communication now, or if you're doing it within Klaviyo, Yeah, that would be the first use case, to just learn more about them and segment them better with a yes, no in an organic way. Like you're not sending them to a survey to fill out, which is fine. That still works, but you'll definitely get a better response if you're doing it two-way communication on SMS.
Yeah, definitely. And then are you all using that? Because I'm assuming you're like talking about the reply to keyword feature.
Yep. Reply to keyword. Yep.
So then are you all using that as like further segmentation? So like if I come in and I'm whatever, I say I like yellow and I'm a size large and I like this and I like that. Like, have you found any, like, is there any segmentation data that's valuable there as well? Or is it more of just a like guided experience to convert them and drop them in the funnel?
Yeah, so I'd say guided experience to convert them as much as possible, but then leveraging that data again in a very similar way to email. Like if they do tell you like their sizing is large, extra large, when you have a product launch for a new collection, and I'm going to use apparel here, just dynamic variable large, whatever size info they give you, it does make it more personal, and they're more apt to click through. Again, you don't necessarily have to send different campaigns to different segments. But thinking through a little bit more about the strategy, leveraging that dynamic stuff, that would be the way I would approach it.
Yeah. It seems like everything that you've just really built is like, how do we simplify the mass headache of segmentation from like 5 years ago, which I'm sure was very personal for you in the process. Because like, I know you guys have some of the most robust segmentation of any of the brands I've ever worked with. So I guess my question is like, my next question would just be 5 years from now, what do you hope to see? What are you really excited in these channels? Like, where do you think it's going?
Yeah. So, geez, I feel like every year is dramatically different, and I have no idea.
Is 5 years.
Yeah. Oh man.
What do you want to see next year?
Yeah. Right. Well, I think what's really going to dictate a lot of what happens in these channels is Apple and like where people get their paid traffic sources from, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, and how those evolve. As much as I want to say they exist in their own little vacuum, email and SMS, they're very much dictated by those external channels. I guess in an ideal world, I'd love to see email still exist, obviously, more so as a branding channel than ever, right? But SMS is probably going to be the end all be all, at least for that time period, next couple of years. I really think that. And I'm sure maybe another channel will pop up, Elon Musk and his Neuralink process, that's going to turn into marketing at some point, I'm sure. So
to start airdropping people neck messages.
Yeah. All right, that's a good point too. On airdrop, like cryptocurrencies and NFTs, see how all that plays out. It's all speculation now, but I'm sure that'll matter in the future. So
yeah. So caveat: everything we're about to say is speculation, but I feel like this is too hot of a topic to not talk about. Where do you see that fitting into the game?
Specific email and SMS, you mean, or
just the concept of like Web3 with airdrops? Like how do you? To me, it seems like another natural progression of like it's a push notification kind of. But like how do you think about that, and like how does that weave into the? I mean, now we probably are talking about like a 5-year timeline. Like how does that weave into the stack?
Yeah. So, I mean, on that note, I think the best example of it is Gary Vaynerchuk with his VFriends launch for anyone relatively familiar with the space. But it's just another evolution of like community building, Facebook groups, having your own app. I think having your own NFT project where you really are rewarding your most loyal customers and giving them incentive to want to continue to be your most loyal customers. I think that's probably what makes the most sense long term for that.
Yeah. I also realize that most people probably don't know what airdrops are. Do you want to just quickly cover like what the concept of an airdrop is?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the case of like an NFT, if you have ownership over something on the blockchain, it's very easy to identify that. And you could just have something appear in your wallet. So I'll use Gary V as an example. I don't have one of his VFriends, by the way. I wish I did. But he airdropped like a micro NFT project that instantly was valued at like, I don't know, the lowest one was like $2,000. And everyone that had the NFT got it for free. And I don't know what the parallel to that is for e-commerce yet, right? If you're a customer, spend over XYZ, maybe you're airdropped an NFT of some value or access to an event, or I don't know. There's a million ways to slice and dice it. And leveraging email and SMS to promote it.
Yeah, I think I could also see the like Prime subscription concept of like you spend X amount if you're in a paid subscription to get stack of value, and an NFT could be one of them, because not every brand is going to be Gary Vee and have the same following. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I agree with you. It's just kind of another distribution channel in a similar respect to just like one-to-one comms. You don't have to fight an
Yeah.
algorithm yet.
Yeah. And I guess even to even root it to its core, maybe a little bit more would be like just the effort to like surprise and delight your consumers, your audience. Anytime you can do that, it's a win. And this is just another way to do that. So,
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so coming back to today and coming back to reality, like you guys are looking at a ton of different brands. What's one thing that people need to avoid? Like one thing that you see when you look into accounts and you're going and talking to brands, like you see over and over again, and it just like really frustrates you or makes you pull your hair out.
yeah, I guess it's one thing, but it's two things. All right, it's one thing, and there's
Okay.
two ways you can look at it. And I think at its core, for email and SMS in these channels is just making assumptions. And that assumption is either you can't send more or you can't send less emails, less SMS, what have you. Because sometimes I'll look at an account and they're sending one email a month,
Oof.
which is fine. With the understanding, I can guarantee you everyone on that list would welcome, without complaint, at least one more email a month.
A lot of revenue on the table.
Yeah, exactly. And not even having that revenue discussion, right? Just the fact that like your audience is, they'll welcome more than one message a month. I guarantee it. So there's that, and that still happens more than I would expect. You know, people are undersending for fear that they can't send more. That's which is fine, valid point. You don't want to abuse your list. And then on the flip side, they're sending way too much with the thought that they have to maintain relevancy and revenue, which isn't necessarily all the case either. And it's just thinking through that strategy a little bit more, looking at the data, the unsubscribe rates, the open rates, what are customers emailing in or sending text back, like, en masse, are they annoyed, what have you. Just looking at that, letting the data dictate it and not assuming. That's one thing I would say consistently across the board. When I look at any brand, any account, there's a lot of assumptions that are probably hurting their revenue potential or their long-term value of their lists.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because it seems like those two things are at odds, but usually they're not. So are there any like barometers or certain percentages that you're looking for of like, hey, this is too much or this is too low? Like, is it a certain unsubscribe rate? Is it a certain amount of people responding based on the send lists? Like, how do you think about that when you're figuring out, like you're kind of fine tuning Chris's algorithm on should we send more or less?
Chris's algorithm, I like that. Yeah, so definitely used to be a little more open rate driven, no longer the case. I'd say the end all be all would ultimately be unsubscribe rate, in my opinion. That's a very good indicator. Ignoring revenue, ignoring opens, ignoring clicks. Like if people like and enjoy and are buying from what you're selling or sending them, or if they're like, get me off this list, I have no desire, you're the worst brand ever. So really unsubscribe rate hovering anywhere from like 0.3 to 0.4% of your sends, which, all platforms make that very easy to see, would be my main barometer. If you're hovering around like a 0.01%, that's a pretty good indicator, which is great. That's a good number to have. You want it as low as possible. If it's that low, you're definitely not sending enough. You want a certain amount of unsubscribes because that means you're sending an appropriate amount of messages. And that's for email. On SMS, honestly, it's wildly different from every client we work with. Some are, around 0.5% per campaign, and some are around 7%. And their baselines are different. I'm sure that'll level out over time, but that's still kind of the Wild West from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, definitely. And then because SMS, I feel like it's so different by customer base and by adoption and by scale. For email, is there a unsubscribe rate where you're like, whoa, Nelly?
Yeah. Well, recently I did an audit of an account and their unsubscribe rate was around 2%.
Ooh.
I don't know why honestly, at that point, your deliverability is definitely taking a hit because they had maintained that 2% unsubscribe and relatively high spam complaint for a while. But they were just sending too much with absolutely zero list segmentation as far as like, there are people on the list for 7 years that probably hadn't opened in 6 and they're getting emails.
Straight to the spam folder.
Yeah, for real. And there is I'm not gonna say there's a place for that, but if you wanted to get fancier with it, there's a way to maybe be okay with a slightly higher unsubscribe rate based on your list growth and like your growth rate overall. But normally it's shoot for like that 0.3 to 0.4%.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you have to, when you really are pushing that upper bound, you really have to be very tactful about how you go about the entire list program to make sure that your deliverability doesn't implode. So I know you're incredibly busy. I know you got to jump to 4 or 5 other things. So a couple of questions I'd like asking everybody and wrapping up. What's one piece of content that you would consume, can be any type of content that you recommend everybody listening would consume. The only rule is it can't be anything that's yours.
Sure. There's this new, I don't want to call him a new influencer because I feel like he's been around for a while, but he started pushing content more and more, is Alex Ramosi, if you've ever heard of him. He's got a book called like $100 million Offers. I just finished it. He throws stuff up on YouTube, he's got Instagram. His whole thing is he doesn't want to sell you anything, which at the end of the day is not necessarily true, but the content he's pushing is it's zero fluff. It's all actionable. It's all mindset. It's all business. I really like it. So I think if it's like the anti-guru, if you will. I think he's got some real tactful insights, and I'd recommend everyone check him out.
Very cool. How do you spell Ramosi?
Or Hermosi, HORMORIZI. I don't even know.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked because I was starting in the completely wrong place. Second question. If with all of your experience now, if you could go back to Chris, who hated engineering and getting into ecom for the first time, you had to repeat everything over again. What's one thing that you'd make sure to impress upon yourself that this time you were going to just ace it?
One thing I would impress upon myself. That's a deep question there, Jeremy. One thing. Be okay to go slower. Okay. In all areas. Financially, career-wise, take your time to learn, recognize you're young. I guess. I feel like I had some false sense of urgency for a lot of things, which has not necessarily not served me well, but ultimately probably going slow to then go fast would have, in all areas of life, probably is beneficial.
Yeah. Patience is still a virtue I'm trying to learn. If you were interviewing yourself, if you were sitting in my seat, what's one thing that I should have asked you? What's one thing we should have talked about today?
Another deep question.
What'd I miss?
Yeah, I guess not one thing you should have asked or anything like that, but I know a lot of our discussion so far has been like high level or tactful, like in the weeds, somewhat fancy ways to approach pop-up, data collection, SMS, back and forth communication. And that's all well and good, and that's all impactful. I guess anything I want to impress, though, is somewhat of the opposite to more of the email design, keeping it simple. If your fundamentals are strong, you've got sound strategy, keep things simple, less is more. That's like 80, 90% of everything. Don't think you have to get super fancy with it to start, I guess, or even maintain. Like I said, that $30 million brand doing a couple emails a week, super basic. That can be everyone if they want it to be. So I guess that would be the one thing I'd want to impress on this interview is less is more. You don't have to get super ridiculously fancy with it.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of the marketer's trap. We always want to outdo ourselves and just make it better. And usually it's the simplest thing that always wins. So if anybody wants to learn more about yourself or ecom growers, where should they go?
Yeah, just head over to ecomgrowers.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Christopher Maroney-Pettit. You can friend me there. I've actually been trying to put more effort into LinkedIn to network and just get to know people in the space. Because I feel like you asked me that other question, one thing I could have done differently as I'm kind of going through this journey is probably just be more open to it and like seek out people in the industry like yourself even just to get to know them. Because there's a lot of things to learn, but at least have a network and friendships with people that are in the same space. It's beneficial. And I didn't do much of that. So more of that.
Nice. Well, everybody go follow and friend Chris on LinkedIn so that he has more people in his network.
It's a cry for help.
No, but I really do agree with you. Like, I feel like easily the greatest strides I've made in my career and also like in my general understanding and doing stuff was just from reaching out to people and getting to know people and like, hey, how are you doing this? Hey, what are you like looking at? It's honestly a big reason why we do the podcast is I get to sit here for a half hour, a couple of days a week or a couple of days a month and just ask people what's going on. And so, this was a lot of fun. Really appreciate you jumping on with all the great insights.
Cool. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening to another week's episode of the Messenger Mastermind podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with another e-commerce marketer. And always let us know what you think down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe. If you're looking for cutting edge tactics and the resources that we rely on to run our businesses, sign up for our newsletter. We'll include a link down below. As always, stay confident, connect with your customers, and keep crushing it.